Hi there, my name is Jimmy JP Snoek, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Tyken, where for the past 4 years we've been creating a future of opportunity through digital identity with some of the world's most trusted organizations. And today I'd like to talk to you about self-sovereignty, and specifically self-sovereign identity. But before we go there, I'd like to talk first about the macro environment of our data, about our privacy and the security of our data. So what's going on? Over the past 10 years, we've been seeing rampant metadata correlation, which has been shrouded in this idea of innocence. It's just for targeted ads and such. But then we see through Cambridge Analytica and many of the large tech co's selling our data, that this can turn quite malignant. The world is more divided as it's ever been, and by and large, that's because of the rampant metadata correlation that's been going on. Apart from that, the propensity of data breaches is making KYC a larger and larger risk factor. While still completely sensitive to fraud. It's still not that difficult to defraud KYC systems, even for banks and open fraudulent accounts. But that still doesn't even hold a candle to 1.2 billion invisible people who are still entirely socioeconomically economically excluded. So besides that, on the more positive side, I guess, we see an increasing consumer demand for privacy. We saw major adoption of Signal after Edward Snowden and Elon Musk tweeted post the WhatsApp privacy policy changes, and people flocked towards Signal, which is great to see. It's amazing. At the same time, we're seeing growing concerns for privacy on a regulatory level, to some extent, with GDPR and GDPR-inspired regulations. At the same time, that's juxtaposed by stricter KYC requirements, like the FinCEN personal crypto wallet KYC proposal that I believe today or last week, whenever, was put on hold by President Biden. And at the same time, because of those regulations and because of these higher risks, we see a growing demand for data minimization. And so let's see how did we get here? How do we get to these massive risks, to this broken system that's leaving so many people further and further and further behind and excluded, that is putting all our data and our privacy at risk. And that started by and large by the identity issuance and verification processes that we still have, that even when they're not on paper, they're still paper-based, right? And when we started to construct our online identities, even before that, when the internet started, it scaled so rapidly that we couldn't even stand to think, what will the implications of this be, say, 30 years into the future? It was very hard to foresee that we would be where we are right now. And so it's not surprising that in the very beginning, with our very much centralized online identity systems, we could still get away with username Jimmy password Hunter2 and have a separate one of those for every single website that we went to. And then it narrowed down a bit. It became more federated. And you saw larger organizations swooping in to take over that task, which increased the user experience tremendously. But at the same time, it gave us this direct incentive to pass off our data. And now we're at the point where we do everything online. And so our whole life is right there on the internet. And we started going towards more user-centric forms of identity. That was the next phase, in terms of OpenID, Auth0. But then, should the next phase be? If we're thinking about it, and considering the current implications of all this, and considering that still a large amount of people are also left behind. And so in 2016, Christopher Allen started writing about the 10 principles of self-sovereign identity and the path towards self-sovereign identity. And he posed that for this next phase in identity, it should uphold these 10 principles. There should be, users should have this, an existence with control and access that is entirely controlled by them. So an identity that starts with the I and that is controlled by me, that allows me access, that I control, that allows me to give consent on every interaction, whose systems are entirely transparent, it's systems and algorithms. It should be persistent, it should be portable, it should be widely used, interoperable. It should be minimized in how much we disclose about ourselves, and above all, it should protect us. Going from there, many organizations, including ours, started building from these principles and kind of established 3 major pillars for the technical infrastructure, for what that would look like. And so it came down to decentralized identifiers, verifiable credentials, and a verifiable data registry or a blockchain. So for the decentralized identifiers would be for establishing peer-to-peer connections for data exchange. Verifiable credentials, the digital watermarking of that data, to have truly digitally native credentials and no longer paper or paper-based, being digital credentials that were ported into the digital world from the paper world, but something natively digital. And then a registry to really be able to verify and audit who signed this, when was it signed, was this revoked, and can I trust that this is the true institution that issued this. So if we're thinking about that flow, what that would mean, to give an example, and I think an example that a lot of people can relate with is anything to do with mortgages or buying a house, and the ridiculous amount of data you have to give and show. Your passports, your employer statements. In the US, probably everything to do with your credit scoring, but also salary specifications. Giving your salary slips, insights, etc. Proving your income, proving that you're liquid and that you can pay the mortgage. So in a digital way, how this would ideally go is, say if I want to buy a house, go to the Dutch government, and the Dutch government is an issuer that has a public identifier. Using that public identifier, they sign my credential, my digital passport, and they send that over to me, and I sign it with my personal decentralized identifier. Now, going to my mortgage advisor, of course, they need to know certain things about me, and they need to verify certain things about me. And so I can either at this point selectively disclose things about myself, because some information they do need to keep, and others that they just want to know but don't necessarily have to keep. I could prove about myself. For instance, I could prove that I'm of age to buy a house, that I'm over 18, and using zero knowledge proofs for this. But now they also want to see that I have a fixed contract and that I have a stable income, and if I earn above X, to be able to afford the mortgage. So then I would go to Tyken and ask to send me an employer statement in the terms of a credential. that collects this information that I can then prove again to the mortgage advisor. So to prove I earn over X, I work at Tyken, I have a fixed contract. And the verifier doesn't have to phone back home to Tyken, to the Dutch government. No, they can see the public identifier of, for instance, the Dutch government. They can check that against the verifiable data registry, and they can see, oh, it was the true Dutch government that issued Jimmy his passport, and it's not been revoked since, so we are good to go. And so this sounds perhaps lightly complicated on the theoretical back-end side of things, but this can look quite simple, and that is what this should do. It should also make things more simple while giving us more control. And so an example of this concretely, of SSI in action, we went to Turkey 2 years ago, and we had this idea of just digitizing a temporary protection card, and in that way helping the refugees and making their lives easier. But after going there, we saw that ultimately that was the least of their concerns. And so after doing research for a good while, for being there for a month and going into the field and speaking with all the stakeholders, we found that there was a bigger issue at hand in terms of employability, because the work permit application process from the employers was quite long and an arduous process to go through, which provided a direct disincentive to hire refugees, because often these employers would have to hire an accountant to do it for them, and so they had the initial costs for the permit, then the accountant's markup, and then the recurring costs as well, which in a lot of cases was also passed on to the refugee illegally, but that was the reality. So what we proposed to the Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Chamber of Commerce in Istanbul and UNDP is to create a system through which it would be easier for the employer to prove that they own their company with a certificate, and then be able to, through an application, go through the work permit process more easily. And this is what we did over the summer. So we allowed for peer-to-peer communication channels between the employer and the Istanbul Chamber of Commerce. They were able to issue them a certificate of ownership of their business, and through the application, super easily, within 3 steps, we're able to apply for a work permit for a refugee to work with them. So this is one of many of the applications. If you want to know more about SSI, more about the certain use cases, also financial use cases, healthcare, education, scan the QR code, take a look at our website, take a look at our ultimate beginner's guide to SSI that takes you through the whole thing, or send me a message, send me an email. Well, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your time, and thank you.